Chapter 25, Transition to Modern America. The 1920s were marked by rapid economic and urban growth as well as rapid social change, inspiring tensions as rural America resisted many of these far-reaching changes. The Second Industrial Revolution, based on mass production, the moving assembly line, and the marketing of consumer goods, the economy of the 1920s experienced phenomenal growth. The automobile industry. The automobile industry, one of the most important of the 1920s, significantly affected American culture, stimulating other industries like steel, rubber, paint, glass, and oil, and changing the nation's physical landscape. The subtle changes in the industry also illustrated an inherent instability within a consumer goods-driven economy. Once people purchased a longer life item, they no longer needed to buy it, which removes them from the market. Patterns of economic growth. Other industries not connected to the automobiles also boomed, including the electrical industry, radio broadcasting, motion picture production, and the development of light metals like aluminum and the production of synthetic materials like rayon and cellophane. The large corporations run by a professional manager dominated businesses in the 1920s, and the most distinctive feature of business during the era was the emphasis on marketing and advertising. Economic weaknesses. Despite the economic progress of new industries, some elements of the economy fared poorly, including traditional industries like railroads, coal, cotton, textile, and agriculture. While the middle and upper classes experienced prosperity, workers and minorities did not. New technologies meant fewer workers were needed to produce certain goods, forcing some into lower-paid service industries. Unions found themselves stalled in achieving better pay for working conditions for their members, as employers were able to portray them as radicals, minorities who had migrated north during World War I found work, but only in low-paid menial labor. Additionally, they were ghettoized and continued to face hostility and discrimination. City life in the Jazz Age. Still another important feature of the 1920s was the rapid rise of the cities and the consequent changes in society. Skyscrapers were the most visible feature of the new cities and became a symbol of progress and new metropolitan way of life. Women and family. Women continued to work outside of the home in increasing numbers, though they were confined to low-paying jobs and excluded, for the most part, from the professionals. Families changed as a result of falling birth rates through easier access to birth control and rising divorce rates, as well as married women continuing to work after marriage. Young men and women who previously would have joined the workforce as teenagers discovered adolescence as they attended high school and rebelled against parental authority. Though women had achieved the vote, the feminist movement continued to be active, lobbying for full equality under the law. For many young women, the assertiveness of the feminist movement translated into rebellion against Victorian social mores rather than crusading for social progress. The Roaring Twenties. The Cultural Revolution also promoted the rise of organized crime, spectator sports, and a sexual revolution. Much of the rise in crime can be attributed to the Prohibition, as more and more Americans were willing to break the law to acquire alcohol, and rival bootleggers competed with each other for control of the markets. The flowering of the arts. Frustrated with the materialism of mass culture, many literary figures wrote scathing criticisms of the new era. Others lived in self-exile in Europe. African American authors in America, however, found energy and inspiration in the Harlem Renaissance. The Harlem Renaissance also affected art and music, and the underlying message was one of pride in blackness. The rural counterattack. Insecurity in the face of all of this social upheaval caused rural and small-town America to reject to the dominance of the city. Anti-immigrant activity increased, as did movements aimed at cultural and political conformity and the return to traditional values. The fear of radicalism. Tradition-minded Americans feared the specter of Bolshevism and anarchism and tried to eliminate radicalism from American life, abusing civil liberties in the process. Their fear fed on the recent Russian Revolution, as well as several violent strikes in the spring and summer of 1919. Public outcry led to government action in the deportation of hundreds of immigrants suspected of communist ties. By 1920, the scare abated as the extremism of the government's reactions sunk in. Even so, the 1920s continued to be colored by nativism, bigotry, and intolerance. Prohibition. Many associated with alcohol, with alien cultures, and the new urban ways. The 18th Amendment prohibiting the manufacture, sale, and transportation of alcoholic beverages was ratified in 1918. The Volstead Act passed in January 1920, implementing prohibition. Enforcement was lax, however, and there was widespread non-compliance with the law, especially among the middle and upper classes. The Ku Klux Klan. The phenomenal growth of such groups as the Ku Klux Klan was also a reaction to the new urban culture. Such groups tried to preserve what they thought was sacred and pure and to limit the rights of blacks, aliens, non-Protestants, and anyone who refused to conform to their standards. A different Klan from that of the Reconstruction era, the 1920s Klan found members throughout the nation and were open and active in politics. The Klan fell when some of its more violent activities, misuse of funds, and sex scandals came to light. Despite the virtual disappearance of the Klan, the hatred and nativism it represented continued. Immigration restriction. Nativists successfully restricted foreign immigration, and Congress passed a series of laws aimed at limiting immigration, especially from Southern and Eastern Europe and Asia. The restrictive legislation on immigration was the most lasting achievement of the rural counterattack, lasting until the 1960s. The fundamentalist controversy. Some Americans found solace in security and supporting fundamentalist Christianity or in opposing theories of revolution or evolution being taught in the public schools. The Scopes trial was the most notable of the challenges to evolution. Politics of the 1920s. Though the Republicans appeared to control the decade by winning the presidency from 1921 to 1933, the rural-urban tensions dominated and shaped the course of politics during the 1920s, and the Democrats gained sufficient numbers of urban and immigrant voters. Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. The Republicans dominated the White House with three popular presidents, Harding, Coolidge, and Hoover. Republican policies. In this era, the Republican Party returned to traditional Republican policies, passing a program of higher tariffs, lower taxes, and spending cuts. Growing problems as the decade progressed challenged these policies. The divided Democrats. The Democrats were divided on rural-urban issues, but They were gaining strength among the new immigrant voters of the big cities. Additionally, they gained strength in Congress throughout the decades. The election of 1928. The election of 1928 symbolized the decade pitting Democrat Al Smith, a Catholic, urban, wet son of immigrants, against Republican Herbert Hoover, an old stock, dry Protestant from Iowa. Hoover won easily, but the Democrats won majority in the nation's 12 largest cities, indicating the emergence of a new Democratic electorate. The 1920s represents the transition of the United States to the modern era. Despite the prosperity and progress of the era, the foundation was unstable.